Okay, so here we are at the final part of this workshop, and which is our roundtable with our speakers of today and Tommaso Caselli, who joined the panel of speakers of today. Tommaso is also an advisory member of the project Abstraction, and he's an NLP scholar in Groningen, in the Netherlands. Since some of the LLMs, artificial intelligence, human-machine interaction topics arise during the day, I think we all think that it's probably also interesting to have an expert, an additional expert on that sector, let's say, on that topic. So I would start with reading. We thought about potential questions that could, on one hand, spark the discussion, on the other hand, help us as speakers and as participants align and cooperate in finding pathways forward for research focused on conversational dynamics. And so these are three broad questions that probably can be addressed in different ways and that can help us start the conversation on this topic. The first one is methodological. So we have had a collection of brilliant and thought-provoking thoughts today, each coming from a different angle, using different methods. And so each of the methods have, challenges, risks, but as well as potential. And so I would like to ask the speakers, what are the methods and challenges summarized that can be used, the best methods and challenges that can be used, the best methods and the worst challenges, to focus on conversational data in natural settings. So does any of the speakers want to Riccardo?
Okay, so a current interest of mine is day-long recordings, which is recorders that are put on usually babies, but also different kinds of humans, and record up to 15 hours of everything that happens around the sphere. And that creates naturalistic settings, which are much more naturalistic than most of the things that even conversation analysts have.
Perfect.
And so the challenge that these kind of data brings is that on the one hand, qualitative analysts show us that, let's say, abstract words really mean different things according to whether they are repair requests compared to a statement. Right? However, that cannot be done on 400, 500 hours of data. And so the challenge is, how do we actually scale up these analyses? And one of the things that I've been bumping my heads around, and that could be a potential method, is actually, can we do augmented coding systems where we're not just feeding these to ChatGPT or whatever and say, please categorize all the speech acts, but some sort of human in the loop system that highlights places that should be assessed by a human. And I haven't seen it done very persuasively in our field. There are some examples in clinical medicine where it seems promising, but I think that that's both a challenge and a promise. And I don't know if anybody has ideas, because I wouldn't know where to start in implementing.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing, I mean, I don't have much to say to this, but I do know that in our department, there's a researcher called Matteo Folli, who's collaborated on using large language models to sort of streamline human annotation. And it's worked incredibly well for discourse analysis, which is a very sort of involved process where there's a lot of human judgment. And so they basically annotated a bunch of data and then gave it to the LLM to bootstrap it to new data and then verified it afterwards, and it worked like a charm. So I think I'm thinking for the bird corpus, which is so much manual annotation, that I definitely will want to use some of this to sort of especially if you're giving something that's very specific to the AI, then it has a lot to work with. But that's the only thing I have to say.
I think those methods are promising. I also do think that scaling up is sometimes overrated, because we don't need infinite amounts of data. Like, some of the strongest and most robust findings on human interaction have started out by people literally doing very, very careful qualitative work, doing fine-grained transcriptions, and from there actually, starting to count reluctantly in the case of conversation analysts, more happily if you're, more like interdisciplinarily oriented like me. What I like in this emphasis on robust qualitative work in conversation analysis is that it will rarely fail you. So you really get to see an actual phenomenon as it unfolds in actual terms, in real time, by actual people, or people and computers, as the case may be. And there's something about that method of observation which is incredibly strong. The scaling up that can be done using those kinds of starting qualitative observations need not be, as far as I'm concerned, to hundreds of hours, even though we ourselves do work with hundreds of hours in some cases. At some point you run into diminishing returns, actually. So I want to question the premise that we always need to scale up.
No, okay. So first of all, thanks for having me here. I've learned a lot. I was just want to start with this. So I apologize, I was late, but I've learned a lot, and I really enjoyed this every single moment of this day. So on top of that, I do agree that sometimes lots of data is not it's just like wrong. I mean, you don't need that. You can actually do things with smaller models, and they are actually working best. So there is an entire challenge now in the NLP area, ACL, with the baby LM challenge, which is like, okay, let's use, so humans don't see 15 trillion tokens of data in order to learn a language. So there must be something else. So what I think is really, really cool from an NLP perspective is that from today, I've actually got I got ideas on, well, maybe this could actually be done in a model. We could try to implement that. But at the same time, I have a colleague, a really dear colleague. She has been working on modeling emergence of language across artificial agents. And one of the big findings that she got is like interactions across the agent. So, and even like having the agents self, what was the word? I got it like, what here, wait. It's the self-play, so agents playing with themselves. This has an amazing, as a huge impact in the way then the model, the agent are actually able to have learned some functions of a language. Okay, so we are speaking like, okay, word order, but this is like artificial languages, so nothing to do with this. So I think that, yes, I completely agree. And while we actually, I think that the good vibes that I got from today is that there are things that who benefits. I mean, everybody benefits, because it's just shedding lights on some phenomena, and then this can be used even from improving what we've been seeing like in ChatGPT. So I mean, you can actually really downgrade the tone of these models in a way that it's like, look, this is not natural. We should not do that.
It's not, I don't know whether, and to what extent it is relevant, but no, one thought that I had in relation to this question is we speak a lot about conversation, but it would be important also to have some other indexes. So, for example, I don't know, I am thinking of eye contact, or I'm thinking of hyperscanning, for example. We are starting to implement something in that direction. So to measure synchrony, for example, we want to investigate negotiation, and it's important to get this measure. So do we negotiate more when we debate about something which is complex? And how can we detect it with these further methods that do not pertain just the way in which people speak, but also, yeah, yeah, that's maybe that's obvious, but I think it's challenging. And one other issue that I wanted to introduce is the following. So I think one of the difficulties for people coming like me from studies on single words or sentences, etc., is to deal with big, large amount of data and conversations. So, yeah, one point that I mentioned today is how do you trace, for example, abstractness? So which are the uncertainties and these kind of things. But for example, we use, in some cases, we have people discuss starting from an abstract concept, but do they really stick to that, or do they go elsewhere? And how can you measure that? Simply counting on. So these are challenges that I think one should deal with.
Yeah, I think converging evidence and mixed methodology is probably the best, because I believe that naturally occurring data is, of course, what everything starts from and what we should in the end look at. But as you say, they're a lot, they're messy, they're not easy to also to annotate, and they're diverse. So not all interactions are the same. So ideally, we should have to sample also and to balance a corpus of naturally occurring interactions a lot. I mean, we have monologues, we have formal interactions, we have lessons, we have denote. I mean, it's really complex. So I think converging evidence is the answer. And I would like to say that perhaps if we look at linguistic markers of cooperation, linguistic markers of abstractness as cues, and we can make top-down searches for those markers, this may help at least. And once we have annotated portions, as Mark was saying before, of corpus data, then maybe we can fine-tune LLMs and use them as tools to detect those markers in larger data sets. So maybe the scale can go in that direction. So use LLMs to detect those markers, and then we have to be there to analyze the data, I think.
I mean, many points they already said. I agree and share the same feeling of Anna with the difficulty of handle conversational data and try to somehow match psycholinguistic norms, which they have their own cont and pro. They can have can use as a baseline to have the meaning, the baseline of the meaning and how they are processed. But I'm wondering how we can and if it's correct to use them, assuming that the single word meaning that rated by other participant is the same that we got in conversation. And I agree that maybe we should go beyond words and look at, of course, combination of words, adjective, verbs, etc., but also speech act, so the function. So in this way, maybe it depends on what people are saying in that occasion. So, and look at the words that they are using to do think. And yeah, and also I think lab-based experiment can be a way in improving them in more ecological setting, of course, and maybe narrowing the topic in goal-oriented tasks that are, in this case, based on language. So write something together, or where language is the core goal of the task. So otherwise, I think natural conversation, they really go up and down in this variable that we are discussing today.
Yeah, maybe actually. So actually, Katharina, about what you just said, I was actually thinking that your experiments that you showed are really nice demonstration of the fact that experimental data and sort of slightly more naturalistic data doesn't have to be mutually exclusive, and that you can design experiments that are informed and actually use actual examples that exist out there in nature. And I think we have inherited a tradition in psychology in general of sort of trying to eradicate all forms of variation. That's sort of built into trying to get a homogeneous sample, trying to get the most similar words that we can find in a small subset. And then we use stats that also fits this hiding variation or getting variation out of the, throwing it out. And now that we have more advanced statistical methods, we can actually design experiments with variation in mind that are a bit more messy, but we have the advanced stats to control for the messiness. And so the gap between naturalistic data and experiments can be narrowed. And I think your task has shown an example of that. Yeah.
John, you want to?
Yes, I think we already collected very interesting keywords and points like converging evidence, the need to scale up, but not always, and the use of new technologies to do so, but keeping humans in the loop. And what else? I'm trying to summarize the key points. And the need to, converging evidence. So keep doing work with word in isolation, but also looking at words in dialogues and words in natural conversations. Okay, then there is another point of another prompt for you chat GPTs. Your prompt now is who benefits from the study of meaning construction in dialogue? So this question taps into reflections about, pass me the term, impact or knowledge transfer, which is something becoming more and more important for different purposes. So our impact, the impact of our study beyond academia, the impact of our study in society. So is it necessary? Do we defend foundational research? Do we, with public grants and public money and so forth? And so who benefits? I think this topic, conversational dynamics, is a topic that can be more easier than other topics applied to applications even outside academia. So who benefits from the study of meaning construction in dialogue and from the study of variables such as abstractness and abstraction?
Don't break the ice again.
Yeah.
Well, so I don't know how sexy it is for grant writings, but for instance, just reflecting on these topics, for me, is very useful in my pedagogical praxis, right? When do we use abstract words exactly because they bring uncertainty and need for social validation, right? When do we instead go with very specific and concrete examples? So how do we use these knowledge strategically to improve our ability to communicate? And I think that's very important.
Effective strategies in different contexts. Bodo?
Yeah, so maybe a different answer. To me, I want to defend the fun of doing basic research, and I think we have the luxury of being able to study ourselves. And to me, that's intrinsically valuable, like trying to understand ourselves, even if it doesn't immediately lead to an outcome. And I think just coming from the UK, where in the UK, impact is sort of the holy grail, and you cannot get a funding application if you don't demonstrate that you have impact, which I understand is important because taxpayers are paying for it. it has created this shadow industry where you spend the tax money on demonstrating that you've done impact, where then so much tax money is being wasted on showing that you have impacted people rather than just doing good work. And I really want us to fight back against the governments and the funders as much as we can to defend the fun of studying ourselves.
Yeah, I absolutely underline this call for the fun, putting the fun back in fundamental research. I want to add another thing, which is also to do with fundamental research. And it's that, studying how meaning is co-constructed in dialogue. I would add co there. So co-constructed in dialogue. This is really about what it means to be human. Like literally, if I look around me as a linguist now, I see a world constructed by language. This is like literally like buildings, but also social structures, educational institutions, anything really, money, all social institutions, everything really we owe to the co-construction of meaning in dialogue. And so to have a fundamental understanding of those processes is just, you cannot go without it. If you go without it, you end up in like a Trumpian America where they draw up stupid lists of keywords thinking that it's the words that make the, grants on, say, gender or bias or whatever wrong. It's just such an incredibly, it's just an incredible celebration of stupidity. And I think that is also what we need to push back on. We need to make anybody who funds science, but therefore by extension, just the general public aware of this extremely wonderful process by which we co-construct meaning and mutual understanding in interaction. And I think it's an incredible privilege to be able to work on that. And we need to also be more clear about how fundamental it is to human existence.
Yeah, thank you for this discussion, which is very interesting. So I'm very much in line. So I think that fundamental research has to be defended at any cost. At the same time, even though I haven't done much in my life about this, specifically with research, I think that not the issue of funding, but the issue of societal relevance is important. And so I think that we should consider this. So, for example, pedagogy or communication. We studied ecological concepts, and we thought maybe the reason why people don't have environment-friendly behavior is because people don't communicate in the right way. So is that applied research? Maybe it's applied research, but it's also basic research with societal relevance. That's just maybe an example, but I think that both aspects are important. So to think of societal relevance, not to think of applications. So, but also technology. So
okay. I agree on everything. I think that for the Dutch people, I'm almost Dutch now. So you can, when you write a grant, you always need to specify whether your impact is on societal impact or you have a scientific impact. And I think that this is really nice. So in general, because you can say, look, I'm doing really basic research, I can adjust really. So it's like remain within a certain area and not really change society, because you don't really change society after 5-year grant. That's at least my understanding. So okay. But having said these, I think, so who benefits? I can benefit from that. So imagine that if right now what we have in NLP is this really strong pragmatic vision of meaning, where meaning is basically context. So words are just like flatus voce, whatever is there. So they don't have an intrinsic meaning. They take meaning according to where they occur. And this is an extremely pragmatic view of what is meaning, right, from a philosophical perspective. But if meaning is built also in interactions, and then it changes and it varies, it triggers like, okay, how can I train my models in a different way so that actually the representational meaning that I get becomes more sensitive to the specific context of occurrence in that specific instance, in that specific instance of written language or spoken language. So I really, so that's there, like the same from all sides, even that. So this is where I think that the benefit comes from. I mean, but this is like, so this is going back to 30 years back, I think, more or less 40. So really like trying to get a bit more dialogue between, and natural language processing was born as an interdisciplinary effort. We got a bit more on our own. Like, like let's tweak a bit of parameters and let's be the benchmark and let's see what happens. But I think that the more we find a way of having a sharing of knowledge that can actually then be translated into some sort of application. That's what basic research on both sides, because I mean, coming up with a different, completely training up paradigm, it's basic research, which, yeah, okay, it can lead to a tool, but then it builds up on top of findings that comes from more theoretical oriented areas. So I think that, yeah, that's the way to go in a way.
Comments on this side of the table?
I mean, I can add very naive thoughts about that, if I can. I agree with you that it was for me a challenge to think about that, because I never wrote a grant, but I think it's nice that soon, yeah. And it's important to think about what we can benefit in outside the academia. It was a very nice exercise. Also because sometimes as a researcher, maybe also at postdoc, you sometimes struggle to find your path and say, okay, why I'm doing this? You have to answer to this question to yourself. And so it was a very nice exercise for me. And one thing is also, okay, societal impact, but also more individual. And so I came up with the idea of therapy. I think that this the way people communicate to ourselves and make narrative of the trauma, for example, can help to make a different description of reality and of their own reality, internal reality, and maybe, of course, it's very naive and optimistical, but to help therapists to find tools and maybe frame some question in a way, depending on the type of trauma that the people are handling, and shift the language can really help people and to hand and detach from the pain, for example. So I think the meaning of words can have really a huge impact on some mental issues, for example, and also in therapy, which is another interaction, I will say. So that's it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree a lot with that. Yeah. Actually, that's very difficult for me. Every time I have to write the impact part, I feel so useless. And I say, well, what's my impact? It's really something I don't like, I must admit. So I share exactly what you said. But as far as cooperative meaning making is concerned, now that you were talking, I realized that actually awareness is great impact on society. Just making people more aware that what we talk about is the result of cooperation. And if we don't cooperate, we're just monads going in different directions, and we simply don't understand each other. And if we think about social media and those places where people seem to dialogue and seem to be in an interaction, but they actually do not cooperate, and we can see that from a linguistic point of view, they do not dialogue and they do not understand each other very often. So I don't know if this is an impact, but it's sort of maybe making people more aware of this non-individual dimension of meaning. So, yeah. Unmasking the mechanisms. Mask, not Elon Musk, but unmasking also Elon Musk. And making people aware of these dynamics. Yes, very nice, very nice. Shall we move towards, does the audience have comments to contribute to the discussion so far, or thoughts? No, if not, otherwise we can move to the third topic of this roundtable, the third question, and then we can again open the floor for the final comments. And the third topic is talking to AI, which is something that came up today. So do language models co-construct meaning with humans and vice versa? Or
yeah. I liked very much what Mark said in his talk, and also what Riccardo said, and probably also Bob. I mean, many of you said that agents are not agents. I mean, they are tools. And if I think of the cooperative patterns that I described, and of how much speakers go down until they reach their own experience, what experience do language models have? So how can they co-construct meaning like humans do? Because we saw that the co-construction of meaning is based on experience and abstracting from experience. And there you lack experience, basically, unless you consider experience a data set. But clearly, this is not what humans are doing, at least for me.
Okay, so what is an LLM is a matter of debate. Still in the community, we are going in understanding, are they just memorization things? So basically they keep everything in memory and they just spit it out as is. Are they agents? Because there's an entire line of work that goes on actually getting inspiration from agent-based modeling and says, okay, we can actually do something that was not possible 10 years ago using natural language to make this tool work. And it's actually working. I mean, I'm not a fan. I'm not on any of those sides. I'm working in exploring mostly on the memorization part because I'm really curious because if they actually are just they only keep things in memory, then basically lots of things that are part of the hype that accompanies LLMs is actually really bullshit. So if they keep everything in memory, then let's just scale up. They keep everything inside, and that's what you think about. They have a learned language or they have a modelization language. But there is evidence that there are some emerging abilities, and these abilities comes from using language, using chain of thoughts, prompting this kind of a really weak. I'm not like OpenAI people, so completely on the other side. I'm not part of the test crowd people, so no superhumanity, but there are some evidence. The technologies are dangerous. That's what you said, and I just took down. So it's not that these technologies are dangerous. It's the people who design the technologies and make the hype behind these technologies that are dangerous. So it's OpenAI that is dangerous. Is Google that has decided to remove the "don't be evil" from their motto that is becoming dangerous. And so this is the problem. This is, I think, is the biggest problem, that they are sold for things that they are not. So it's our role, really, like as scholars and scientists, to try to fight every single moment to say, look, we really do need to take a tone down on top of that. But in the end, they do not co-construct meanings with people. They do not do that. They just, I don't know how to put it down, absorb in a way. So whatever you give to them, then they just regurgitate. Yeah, but it's not just regurgitating, because if you start looking at language from a more like, okay, there are some formal properties of language and there are some more functional properties of language. There is a lot of work that has been done by the group by Katerina Fedorenko, yes. It looks like that some really basic stuff, so basic complex, but like more on the rule side, so syntax, this part, they have been learning this stuff. They are able to do really long distance dependency in a way that it's surprising, because no one has actually thought explicitly to this model. That's how a long distance dependency with two free relative clauses, embedded relative clauses, they actually work. So there are things that are interesting on this side. But I mean, this stuff is stupid, it's not intelligent. So I completely agree.
So yeah, this is also a very hot topic. So I think I to some extent I agree with you. So I think that there are no similarities between large language models and humans, but at the same time, I would say that they have a merit, that is discussions on language. I come from embodied cognition for a while. Everything was just body. Whereas maybe the role of language in large language models is not as the role of language as here. We do not co-construct meaning. But at the same time, it's important that in the debate, in the scientific debate, the role of language as allowing to perform some activities has been emphasized. So I think this is an important point. I have a couple of other observations which are related to some literature I'm reading now on knowledge, communities of knowledge. So the idea that knowledge is collective, etc. And I think that in this respect, it will be really important to understand what I think Mark emphasized it you did emphasize it in your talk. So how do people interact with these experts? To what extent? So we increasingly rely on experts in this society, in numbers and in what I call determinate concepts. So we increasingly rely on experts. How are we influenced by this specific kind of experts? So, and also another important questions that I think we should address. What happens with children? So I think I see my children speak with Alexa like it's our fourth member of the family. So it's really something amazing. So they ask, I don't know, jokes to Alexa, etc. And so that I think that's important to understand how we rely on them, and also how people who grew up with them rely with this device.
So actually, I'll just. What were you? Sorry.
Well, I'm not an expert on LLM, so I will say something about user experience on ChatGPT because I cannot hide myself. I mean, I think all of us are using it, and the experience that is very dumb, as you said, is mechanical. Feel very mechanical. It gives you the illusion to talk about. To talk with, to have a conversation with someone, okay? But from a psychological perspective, it's required a lot of metacognition and control. So you have to keep and be very precise in ask him or she what you want. And it's something that in a real conversation rarely happens. I mean, it's very rare to talk with someone and already in mind what you want to do, what you want to hear from him. Can happen when you defer on expert, but you don't know the answer. In some case, you just ask to do task that you don't want to do, and then he does it wrong, and then you ask to do it precisely. So it's give also laziness. You became lazy, no? Yeah, but it's true that it's very engaging. It's somehow we are. Music. Yeah.
On the point of engaging, so when ChatGPT gained prominence, we started keeping track of open source versions of systems like this because we wanted to use it in teaching, but not send our data to OpenAI, and we wanted to allow our students to look under the hood. So we started an open source AI index, which is still online if you want to find it. But the reason I mention this is that when we first published the index, we got a lot of newspaper coverage and interviews. And in the wake of that media attention, I got a lot of calls from actual practitioners and people, just citizens who expressed their experiences actually with ChatGPT. And one of the ones that I remember best is a psychiatrist who called me and who told me a story of at least a couple of patients of his who were withdrawing from treatment because, as they were telling him, ChatGPT was always there and always, moreover, agreeing with them and listening to them. It wasn't pushing back. he was obviously gravely worried about this, but he could do nothing because this technology is just out there in the open. And so, yes, engaging it very much is. And I try to never lose sight, no matter all the interesting tech developments. And I think the justified interest, in this technology, I try to not lose sight of the actual people affected by this technology. And that is, I think, something to just be aware of.
Yeah, but so to me, so there are even people who have committed suicide because they were actually involved. So there is really like such a dark side of AI, which is really, really scary. But I think that the only way of fighting that dark side is to actually teach people what you can do and what you cannot do. Honestly, I still got colleagues, not AI expert, but colleagues, so people that work more in the humanities that sometimes come up and says, I've asked ChatGPT and I told this person, like not one time, like multiple times, like this is the last thing that you should do. That is like asking for information there. Don't. It doesn't make any sense. It can really just spit out more than bullshit. Okay. Even if now there are new development that is like, okay, I do a search on the web and then I summarize what I find on the web. So it's a cat chasing mouse game, but the only way of breaking the game is to say, look, this is how it works. This is what you should do it. Please don't. 20 years ago, if you were able to Google properly, you were like 10 steps ahead of everybody else. Now isn't a skill that you don't need anymore. Now you need to start learning how to use properly these tools. So I think that
Google doesn't work anymore.
No, it was a mess, really. Today, I was just looking for something this morning, and it was just like giving me information about Bologna, and I was like, come on, this doesn't make any sense.
On the just one note on the colleagues asking ChatGPT, I read a post on social media the other day which said, and I just want to try to quote from memory, please know that whenever you're in a meeting and you're the one to speak up and say, oh, why don't we ask ChatGPT? Know that at least half of the room is quietly lowering their opinion of you.
Yeah.
Shall I come out as a very heavy user of ChatGPT in my own work? I agree. I hate the sort of ecosystem that surrounds AI and what it does to the internet, and also you talked about sort of how it changes your own cognition, and you sort of lower your threshold for using it over time, and you become more lazy. But some of the discourse, especially on the humanities side surrounding AI, I think is sometimes demonizing the technology so much that it then throws people off as well. And I think we've been talking about, so you talk about information retrieval, which, I mean, getting facts out of these models is really dangerous. But for structuring thoughts, I have found it amazing. So sometimes late in the night and you just had some really you had a vision of a paper, but you weren't quite sure how to start it. And then you ask, what are some pathways through this? You can actually generate a lot of ideas. And now you have all lowered your, I mean, just to say, I'll come out with this. So for example, my inaugural talk, the title, From Birds to Words, was an idea by ChatGPT. It was a selection of me from several things that I gave it to it. I think when you are putting something specific in, rather than retrieving information out, there's a lot of really good use cases. And I think we need to criticize the ecosystem and the technology by still acknowledging that this is something really amazing that's happening here. And I find that sometimes that the people who criticize this technology maybe throw the baby out with the bathwater a little bit too much. Yeah. So I'm a bit of a fan. Thanks.
And well, so what so I had to start using that because I teach a programming course to our master students, and there's no way I can productively stop them from using coding tools. And what I would be really excited to see is some serious work that tries to see what is the trade-offs that are posed by the use of this technology. How does that impact the abilities in coding? So the abilities of produce outcomes, but also of thinking up the code in novices, intermediate, and expert users. And how you be able to then use that information to structure also the teaching and say, well, these are the risks, right? Here are the productive ways you can use it. So to be honest, like I used it to generate all the labels in the plots that I put on my slides for the students, because I had all the codes with terrible X's and the like, and I couldn't be bothered to go through 60 different plots. And that was great because everything was already there. It just had to do some, probably burning half of Amazon to do that. That's a different issue. And I really think that the way to studying the way in which the use of language models affects all these aspects, including expectations. I think I saw somebody on social media today that was saying, I'm very high on the hedonistic treadmills. I would get very grumpy and bored after 30 minutes of coding. And now I get very grumpy and bored after 5 minutes of coding if, you know, Gemini or whatever hasn't solved the problem for me, right? And that's a very different, meaningful experience of the word that is shaped by the engagement, right? And sometimes it could go in positive directions, sometimes in negatives. And I don't feel like there's enough information, like serious study on how to navigate these trade-offs. And of course, the other issue, a big challenge, is that the models keep changing. So I don't know how to make research in these topics that is not obsolete 2 months after.
Like with the kids.
Yes.
Caterina had a comment.
Yeah, just a quick comment that while you were talking, I was thinking that it's crucial actually to educate users that the intention is the user's intention always. I mean, the agent has no intention, communicative intention. It's an echo with respect to your intention. So I think that to educate users is probably the thing, because it doesn't have experience and it doesn't have intention. Once you know this, it does magic with texts and structuring and coding, etc. But it has no intention. So I think this is crucial.
Just a thought that came to mind. I was trying to make nice images for a PowerPoint presentation, and I kept giving descriptions of what I wanted, and it kept giving me ugly images. So I said, okay, write yourself a prompt to make an image, blah, 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 blah. And then the output was a text, was the prompt. Then I fed again the prompt. He gave me the perfect image. Is this a metacognition? Or again, it's not. It's just regurgitating words. It's awareness. It's easy to fall in the trap of thinking that they have self-awareness because they know how to write a prompt for themselves that make them produce a better image or an image that you would like. It's easy to fall in this trap. So I think the topic is still open because of these things. Yeah. Is there any final comments or questions from the audience?
Oh my God. Final is too much pressure on me. So please, someone add a comment after my. I just wanted to connect to something that Julia said before, which I found very interesting. And I think in asking a question to, I don't know which speaker, maybe Mark, saying that so the media and everybody, we are talking about LLMs and ChatGPT as agents, as artificial intelligence, but they are actual language models. And so literally models of language, and what language is comes from basic research, and it's not something that you find in the wild. It's a definition that people in centuries, like linguists, came up with. And these models come on, they are models on a specific definition of language, which up to some time ago, some years ago, we thought it was representative somehow. But maybe all of this that was brought up today tells us that it's not. So I mean, this is also, I think, in connection with point 2 and why are we discussing about all of this? Because we still need to update what language is itself, and so then feed the model again and find the context, the right like window of context again. And yeah, I mean, it's all in the end the same circle. So I just wanted to connect. Yes, comment on that.
Well, I'm gonna keep it really brief, actually. LLMs, they don't have brain. There is no neurons there. There is no communication. So I'm coming from neuroscience. So maybe there is the need to make those LLMs more closer to the brain, how the brain processes those information. And maybe we're gonna get there, how language is actually in specific structure of the brain. And we know quite a lot how the brain, at least few percent maybe from 100, but 2-3%, but at least the 2-3% might be the key. So, and also, I mean, just to keep, from my side, this is my view, they are text-based and text-based is not enough. So sorry, it's just to add that maybe there is that one part, which is the brain where it's the concrete matter where things happening there with language, and yeah, maybe that needs to be included too in the discussion. Yeah.
Is there any other comment, contribution, question? If not, let me check from home if there is any final remarks. No. Okay. What time is it? Yes, perfect. So we did it. There was a high alignment in the round table, but also some non-alignment, so which is good. It's good for conversation. So thank you again, everybody, for taking part in today's event. Thank you, Caterina, and thank you to all our speakers, Caterina, Riccardo, Anna, Bodo, Mark, thank you, and Tommaso for participating in the roundtable. So thank you again, and let's enjoy for the last time this room, about which we didn't share much details, but we will make sure next time we know something about the story, the history behind this room, and have a great evening. Thank you.